Hello, sisters. It's your girl Ola Davis with another episode of When Marriage Hurts podcast. This is episode number 65, and I hope I'm speaking clearly enough for you to hear me and loudly enough for you to hear me. I'm actually recording this in my bedroom closet because it's really early in the morning and I don't want to wake my kids. So here I am in the closet recording this episode. Okay, we'll get right to it. On today's episode, I want to talk about how the church silences women. And I'm not talking about how they silence women when women come forward to say they've been abused. Yeah, they do silence women at that point in time as well. But you know what? Maybe I'll talk about that on the next episode. But on this particular episode, I want to talk about how the church kind of works on our psyche such that when we start to experience abuse in marriage, we tend not to see it as abuse. Yeah, so that's what I want to talk about on episode number 65. So I guess we could call this How the Church Silences Women Part 1. Yeah, I came across this video on Instagram just this past week, and it was this pastor. She's a pastor's wife and a pastor herself. And she was addressing women, and she was saying when your husband is visibly angry about something and they're yelling and shouting and doing all sorts, she's like, you as the wife, you're supposed to keep quiet. You keep quiet. That's not the time for you to explain anything. You just keep quiet about it and say you're sorry, even if you did nothing wrong. I kid you not. She said this. She said, just say you're sorry, even if you did nothing wrong. And on the next day, when you can see that he's not in such a poor mood and he's not angry and he's all calmed down, you just go tap him and say, so about that thing we were talking about yesterday, so essentially she's saying, in the heat of the moment, just say you're sorry, even if you did nothing wrong. Just be quiet and say you're sorry. And then on the next day, when your husband is much calmer, you can then go back to him and said, oh, about that thing that happened yesterday. And if someone had asked me like 10 years ago if this was sound marriage advice, I would have said absolutely. I kind of operated in this kind of naivety myself when I was newly married. And some of you listening right now might still think, well, yeah, isn't that what you're supposed to do as a good Christian woman? Now, the reason it sounds like good advice to you is probably because you were either raised in the church or you've attended marriage seminars, programs, whatever in church, and this is what they teach as well, or you've read Christian books and this is what they teach, or you've gone for Christian marriage counseling and this is what they teach. right? But if you think about it critically, um, generally speaking, is that really a good and healthy way to handle conflicts in marriage? Is it really healthy for one person to always be the one that's throwing tantrums like a toddler and unable to regulate their own emotions? Why one person always has to be the adult that has to keep calm even when they've been verbally attacked and disrespected, right? Doesn't the other person in the marriage that's been told to always be quiet and stay calm, don't they have a right to be angry at all? At what point do they get to be angry about something if there's something to be angry about? And if they are also as human as the other person, why can't they be allowed to get angry too sometimes? I mean, why is there a monopoly on anger, right? Anger is a normal human emotion. So why is why is there a monopoly on anger? Why does the church teach women about, oh, being quiet, like there's some virtue to being the one that keeps quiet? And fine, I'm not going to argue with that, right? If someone's insulting you, it's probably on Christ like to go right back and start insulting them, right? But why is it that it's always the wife that's required to be virtuous in this situation? See, that's what I don't get. That's what I don't get. It's like we're being taught that in a what makes a marriage a Christian, quote unquote Christian marriage, is how Christian the wife is. How Christian the husband is seems to be irrelevant. And I do not get that at all. When you take a critical look at this, it just looks like, not that it looks like, it really is what it is that the church, rather than teach men that it's important for you to regulate your emotions, it's not okay for you to blow up on your wife and blow up on your kids. You need to learn how to manage your emotions. You need to learn how to not get violent. You need to learn how to sit down and talk things through like an adult. See, that's an admirable quality right there. But churches don't want to teach that to men. Instead, they want to teach women on how to, essentially, they want to teach women damage control. They want to teach women how to shrink back, how to be silent, how to be quiet. And I'll share with you how I implemented this very bad, toxic advice in the early years of my marriage, right? So I was married to this wonderful man, also I thought, that he just seemed so, like, even his physical demeanor, everything about him just seemed so calm, cool, and collected. He seemed like someone who couldn't even hurt a fly. He seemed like someone who couldn't even have a bad temper, even if he tried. I mean, that's what it looked like on the outside. And then, after the love bombing stage of the marriage, I started seeing his true colors. I started seeing that he would rage over ridiculous things, right? And that took me by surprise. But because I've always been told that if your husband is upset and is yelling and whatever, just say you're sorry, and say nothing more. So I did that. I said, oh, I'm sorry. And I was also scared anyway. I wasn't just saying I'm sorry because they said to say so, but I felt like saying I'm sorry would keep me safe in that moment. So I said, oh, I'm sorry. And then he just raged and yelled at me, and he was so close to me too when he was doing that. There's something about someone yelling at you from across the room and someone yelling at you when they're like 2 inches away from your face. So I would say, oh, I'm sorry. And I would freeze on the spot. And then the next day or 2 days after that, I would want to have a conversation with him about the incident. And he would just flat out deny. Right? Like, what are you talking about? And I'll find myself trying to remind him of the events that happened a couple of days back. And I'll be like, you remember I was standing by, the kitchen door and you came at me and started yelling because you were upset about this thing. And he would just look at me clueless, like he had no idea what I was talking about. And, in an attempt to remind him, because I naively thought, oh, maybe he forgot about it. And I would try to start explaining. I would try to start, even saying the exact words that he said. And the more I try to explain, the more I try to recount the conversation to get him to remember, right? The more confused he would look, and he would have this look of concern on his face, like he wouldn't say this, but he would look at me like, are you sure you're okay? Right? And that would make me be like, what's going on here? Doesn't he remember at all? And I started to think, oh, my husband must have a memory problem, right? Because at that point I was so naive, I didn't think someone could lie about something they didn't have to lie about. That was what I thought. Because in my mind, I'm like, it's not like something bad is going to happen to him if he admits to doing those things or remembering that conversation. So I couldn't really understand why a person would lie about that. So I just concluded that, you must have some memory issues or something. Like how, and when someone tells you they simply do not remember that conversation happening, or they completely deny that it happened, how do you have a conversation about it? It's impossible. So I get somehow manipulated and forced into silence. And then the pattern continues. And after a while, when that pattern continues where you try to bring up a conversation so you can have a discussion about it, and they stop, they don't even say, oh, I don't remember that happening anymore. They just say, it never happened. When that happens enough times, you start to doubt your own memory. So there was a point where I stopped wondering if he had memory issues. I started wondering if my mind was making things up, if I was hallucinating and seeing all these events. I know some of you can relate to that. Some of you are probably like, what? That doesn't make sense. It happened. But for those that this has happened to long enough, they will probably be nodding their heads right now like, yeah, they will make you doubt your reality. So that was what happened to me. And that's why I no longer consider this, good marriage advice. No, it's toxic. Now, someone might come and they might want to say, well, it doesn't, it's good marriage advice. It just didn't work for you because you were married to an abuser. I would still argue that even if you were married to someone who is not an abuser, it's still not good marriage advice. Like, how, there's no, I mean, you could paint this with any brush, any color you'd like, and it's still going to come out to toxic abuse. Because even if you say, oh, if it's a marriage where there's no abuse, it would be good marriage advice. How is it healthy? How can you say a marriage is healthy when only one person is allowed to yell at the other? That's still abuse. See, that's where the argument falls apart. That's still abuse. It's not about, oh, if you were married to someone who wasn't abusive, it will be good. No, under no circumstance will this kind of advice of, always shut up and take the yelling a good thing. It never is. It never is. So when one person is always having to say sorry, even for what they never did, just to calm the other person down, that is such a dysfunctional relationship right there. It makes absolutely no sense. Yeah, it makes no sense. In a healthy relationship, there is no monopoly on anger or how it's expressed. If you both do not have the option to be angry when you have a reason to, it means one person's emotions in that marriage is being suppressed all the time, 100% of the time. How is that not abuse? How is that not dying in silence? So, yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap it up today. I want to say thank you. I want to say welcome first to all our new listeners. If you're new here, I want to say welcome to all the new members on the Facebook group. The Facebook group is called When Marriage Hurts. I want to say welcome to all the new members. I want to say thank you to those that send me messages on social media. So we are on Facebook as a private group, and we are on Instagram just as a page, right? And I do sometimes get DMs on Instagram from people that tell me that listening to the podcast has been very helpful. I want you to know that I appreciate every single one of those messages. You don't even know what it's like for me to get that kind of feedback. It tells me that, I'm not just sitting in my closet here on a Sunday morning for nothing. It tells me, it really encourages me that the podcast is helping women out there. Thank you so much for your feedback. If you want to join the private Facebook group, it's called When Marriage Hurts. If you want to follow on Instagram, the handle is also When Marriage Hurts. It's a new week, and my prayer for you this week is that things will begin to make sense to you. Everything that you've questioned, everything that you've wondered why this was happening in your life, or things that you've been confused about, you will begin to have a keen sense of perception and begin to see things for what they really are. Abuse does a lot to confuse us. My prayer for you this week is that confusion will be unraveled and you will begin to perceive things for what they truly are. I pray you have a wonderful week ahead, and remember that no matter how dark the darkness is, Jesus is right there with you, and he says he will never leave you nor forsake you. Have a wonderful week ahead, and God bless.